"Dad, it's already done," my son said it gently, almost kindly, as if he were explaining a simple fact to someone who might struggle to keep up. We were sitting at the long walnut table in the executive conference room, 32 floors above, the city I'd spent 4 decades helping build. Afternoon light spilled across the glass walls. My attorney sat to my right, silent. 2 senior officers from the company were across from us, composed but attentive, and my son, my only child, sat at the far end of the table, one ankle resting over his knee, as though he were presenting quarterly results. "The buyer wired the money yesterday," he continued. "Titles signed. It was just sitting in the garage, Dad. This was the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing." I folded my hands in front of me. "I've learned that silence makes people reveal themselves." "You sold it," I said evenly. He nodded. "You weren't driving anymore. Insurance, maintenance, it didn't make sense. I figured you'd thank me once you saw the numbers." He gave a small, reassuring smile, the kind meant to calm someone unreasonable. I studied him for a long moment. The confidence, the certainty, the assumption that love grants authority, and you believed it was yours to sell, I asked quietly. He sighed. "Dad, I'm your son. Eventually everything becomes mine anyway. I'm just getting ahead of things, making it easier on you." Across from me, my attorney opened a thin black folder and slid a single sheet of paper into my hands. I didn't raise my voice. "The vehicle," I said, looking directly at him, "is not registered under my personal name." He blinked. "What?" "It's held by Harrington Industrial Holdings." A pause. "My company," I clarified. The air in the room shifted. He straightened slightly. "But you retired." I stepped back from daily operations, I replied. "I never relinquished ownership." The color in his face changed, subtle but noticeable. The first hairline fracture in his certainty. "You signed documents," I continued calmly, "selling an asset you do not own, an asset held by an active corporation." No one else spoke, and for the first time since he'd walked into that room, my son didn't look sure of himself. That was the moment he realized this was no longer a family discussion. It was a legal one. 3 weeks earlier, I still believed the boy who once asked permission before borrowing my tools would never presume to sell something that wasn't his. 3 weeks earlier, my life was orderly, quiet, intentional. I wake early, always have, 5:30, sometimes earlier if the light slips through the curtains just right. I make coffee the same way Margaret taught me 47 years ago. Fresh grounds, measured water. No shortcuts. There's comfort in doing something properly, even if no one is watching. The house is too large for one person now, but I've never considered selling it. Every room holds a version of our life. Margaret's piano in the sitting room. The faint indentation on her side of the mattress. The garden she insisted we plant ourselves instead of hiring landscapers. Grief, I've learned, is not loud. It's persistent. After breakfast, I usually step into the garage. The car sits under a fitted gray cover. A 1967 midnight blue Corvette Stingray. I bought it the year my son was born. Back then, it wasn't a collector's item. It was simply something I'd worked hard enough to afford. I restored it slowly over the years. Weekends, evenings, sometimes with my son handing me tools when he was small enough to need both hands for a wrench. He used to sit in the driver's seat and pretend to steer while I worked under the hood. "Don't scratch it, Dad," he'd say solemnly at 6 years old. I never did. After Margaret passed, I drove it less. Not because I couldn't, but because some things feel heavier when the passenger seat is empty. Still, I kept it maintained. Fluids checked, battery charged. Engine turned over weekly. Stewardship matters. You care for what you've built. My son Daniel lives 20 minutes away. He runs what he calls a consulting venture. It has changed forms 3 times in 7 years. I've invested quietly in 2 of those iterations. Loans, technically. I've never pressed for repayment. A father wants his son to stand tall in the world. Daniel visits most Sundays. He brings my granddaughter sometimes, which I appreciate. He rarely comes alone. His wife, Claire, is efficient and articulate. She has a way of evaluating rooms as though calculating square footage and resale potential. They often comment on the house. It's a lot to manage. Dad, Daniel will say casually, glancing at the staircase. You ever think about downsizing? I manage, I reply, and I do. I still serve as majority shareholder of Harrington Industrial Holdings. I stepped back from daily operations 5 years ago, appointing a capable CEO. But I attend quarterly board meetings. I read every report. I built that company from a 2-person fabrication shop into a regional supplier with over 300 employees. Retirement for me meant reducing noise, not surrendering responsibility. Daniel knows this. Or at least he should. A few weeks ago, he lingered in the garage longer than usual. He circled the Corvette slowly, hands in his pockets. You don't drive this much anymore, he observed. Not as often, I admitted. It's worth a lot now, he said. Market's hot for classics. I smiled faintly. Some things aren't for the market. He crouched slightly to peer at the wheels. Insurance alone has to be, what, 2-3 grand a year? I can afford insurance. He chuckled, but there was an edge to it. That's not the point. It's about simplifying. You've done enough. You don't have to hold on to everything. Hold on to everything. It was an interesting choice of words. I pulled the cover back into place with deliberate care. I'm not holding on to everything, I said calmly. Just what matters. He didn't argue that day. But something in his expression shifted, subtle, evaluative, as though he were beginning to inventory my life. The following Sunday, the conversation returned. Claire stood beside him this time. We were just thinking, she began smoothly. It might be smart to start organizing assets now. Makes estate planning cleaner. Estate planning is already organized, I replied. Daniel gave a reassuring laugh. No one's rushing you, Dad. We're just trying to help, before things get complicated. Complicated. I've negotiated contracts worth 8 figures. I've navigated recessions and supply chain collapses. I've managed union disputes and regulatory audits. But in that moment, I understood something had shifted. They were no longer speaking to me as a man fully in command of his affairs. They were speaking to me as a future absence. I didn't confront it then. I simply nodded and changed the subject to my granddaughter's school recital. I believed, perhaps naively, that the undercurrent was anxiety, not entitlement, that my son was worried about the future, not impatient for it. I did not yet realize he had already begun making decisions on my behalf, and I certainly did not imagine that the first thing he would choose to simplify was the one object I had never once treated as negotiable. The Corvette wasn't just a Hornet, was proof that a young man with grease on his hands and ambition in his chest had once built something from nothing. And apparently, my son had decided that proof was excess inventory. The first time Daniel used the word capacity, I knew the conversation had crossed a line. We were seated at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon. Not Sunday, Tuesday. He'd called ahead, said he wanted to check in. Claire wasn't with him this time. That, in hindsight, was deliberate. I poured him coffee. He didn't touch it. Dad, he began, folding his hands in front of him, I've been thinking a lot about your workload. My workload, I repeated mildly. You still go into the office for board meetings. You're managing the house alone, handling investments, the car, the upkeep. It's a lot. It's manageable, I said. He nodded as if indulging me. Right, but capacity changes? That's natural, there it was. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Capacity for what exactly? For everything, he said carefully. Decision-making, risk assessment, big picture stuff. I studied him for a moment. This was not the language of a son worried about his father's comfort. This was the language of someone building a case. My physician seemed satisfied with my capacity, I said evenly. He gave a small, patient smile. Dad, I'm not saying you're incapable. I'm saying it might be smart to transition some responsibilities now, before anything forces the issue. Nothing is forcing any issue. He exhaled through his nose as though I were being stubborn. You don't drive the Corvette, he said, pivoting. It just sits there. I drive it enough, and when was the last time? I didn't answer immediately, not because I couldn't remember, but because I didn't appreciate the tone. 2 weeks ago, I said. He tilted his head slightly. You sure? That did it, yes, I replied, holding his gaze. I am sure. Silence settled between us. He shifted in his seat. Look, Dad, Claire and I have been talking. The market for classic cars is strong right now. We could get a very good price. That money could be reinvested, protected. Protected from what? From volatility, from mistakes. The word hung there. I folded my hands on the table the way I do in meetings when someone is underestimating the room. Daniel, I said calmly, are you suggesting I am prone to mistakes? No, I'm suggesting you don't need the stress. I am not stressed. He looked at me then, not as a son looks at a father, but as a manager looks at an aging executive who hasn't realized the board is planning succession. You don't have to prove anything anymore, he said. Softly, I almost smiled. I'm not proving anything, I replied. I'm living. He tried another approach. Insurance on that car alone is almost $3,000 a year. Maintenance, storage, appreciation risk if the market dips. It's inefficient capital. I recognized the phrasing. It wasn't his. It was Claire's, or perhaps something he'd picked up trying to sound seasoned. Not all capital is meant to be efficient, I said. He leaned forward. Dad, be realistic. Eventually these decisions fall to me. Why not let me start managing some of it now? There it was again, not if, not when the time comes. But now, I haven't asked you to manage anything, I said. His jaw tightened slightly. I'm trying to help. Help requires permission. He looked away first. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to wait at the edge of the driveway for me to come home from the shop. The teenager who asked before borrowing the car. The young man who once said, I hope I can build something like you did. But that boy had been replaced by someone calculating timelines. I just don't want things to get messy later, he said finally. If something happened to you tomorrow, we'd have to untangle all of it. My estate is structured, I replied. Thoroughly, he frowned. Structured how? That's taken care of. He didn't like that answer. So you're not even open to discussing the car? I'm open to discussing anything, I said. I'm not open to surrendering it, his tone cooled. It's just metal, Dad. No, I said quietly. It isn't. He stood up then, pacing once across the kitchen floor. A habit he's had since childhood when frustrated. You're being sentimental. Yes, I agreed. I am, he stopped pacing. You know what this looks like to Claire? I waited. It looks like denial. The word landed with more weight than he probably intended. Denial of what? I asked. That you're not in the same place you were 10 years ago. He said it gently, carefully, as though cushioning the blow made it less of one. I am not in the same place I was 10 years ago, I said. I am older. That is not a diagnosis. He rubbed his temples. I'm not attacking you. It feels like you're preparing to replace me. His eyes flashed. That's not fair, isn't it? Silence again. He picked up his coat from the chair. Just think about it, he said. About simplifying. About letting me handle things before it becomes necessary. Necessary to whom? I asked. He didn't answer that at the door. He paused. I don't want to fight about a car, he said. Neither do I replied. The door closed behind him. I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The house did not feel smaller. I did not feel confused, but I felt something else, measured, assessed, as though my son had begun drafting a version of my life that no longer required my signature. 3 days later, a neighbor would knock on my door and ask why a flatbed truck was scheduled to pick up my Corvette. And that was when I realized the conversation had never been about concern. It had been about timing. My neighbor, Tom Wilkes, has lived across the street for 20 years. He's the sort of man who notices things, not out of nosiness but out of habit. Retired firefighter, watches the rhythm of a block the way some men watch stock tickers. He knocked on my door just after 9 on a Thursday morning. Morning, Richard, he said. You expecting a transport truck tomorrow? A transport truck, I repeated, flatbed. Guy came by yesterday while you were out. Said he was scheduling pickup for a classic Corvette. Blue one. For a moment I thought he was joking. No, I said calmly. I'm not expecting anyone. Tom shifted his weight. Well, he seemed pretty sure. Said your son handled the paperwork. There is a particular sensation when something inside you drops, not dramatically, but with precision, like a coin falling straight down a well. I see, I said. Tom studied my face. Everything all right? Yes, I replied evenly. Thank you for letting me know. When I closed the door, I did not rush. I walked to the garage. The Corvette sat exactly where I had left it. Cover smooth. Battery tender light glowing faint green. I stood there for several minutes, then I called Daniel. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Dad, are you selling my car? I asked. A pause. Too brief to be surprised, too long to be casual. I was going to talk to you tonight, he said. That wasn't my question. He exhaled. Yes, I listed it. And I accepted an offer. You accepted an offer, I repeated. It was strong, Dad, very strong. Above market. I didn't want to lose the buyer. You didn't want to lose the buyer, I said again, letting the words settle between us. Look, he continued, slipping into the same measured tone from the kitchen conversation. We've been over this. You're not driving it. It's inefficient. This is smart timing. You do not have authority to sell my property. I'm your son. That is not a legal designation. He grew impatient. Dad, I signed as family representative. It's fine. The title's straightforward. The title, I said quietly, is not straightforward. He laughed once. It's a car, not a merger. You signed my name? I signed on your behalf. It's basically the same thing. It was not. Send me the documents, I said. I'll bring copies tomorrow when the buyer comes. The buyer is coming here? Yes, noon. I told him that worked for you. You told him that worked for me. Daniel, I said evenly, you will cancel that appointment. I can't. Funds have already been wired. To whom? A pause. To the account. Which account? Our joint family account. There was no joint family account with vehicle authority. There was an account I had once added him to for convenience. Household contingencies, nothing more. You deposited corporate asset proceeds into a personal account? I asked. Corporate, Dad, what are you talking about? I am asking you to cancel the pickup. It's too late, he snapped. Why are you making this difficult? Difficult. I closed my eyes briefly, not in confusion, but in restraint. You made a unilateral decision, I said. Without consent. Without clarity. That is not difficulty. That is overreach. Overreach. His voice sharpened. I'm trying to protect you from being taken advantage of. Classic car buyers prey on older owners all the time. And you are protecting me, I said, by becoming the predator yourself? Silence, that's unfair, he muttered. No, I replied. It is accurate. He shifted tactics. Dad, if something happened to you, Claire and I would be left cleaning up scattered assets, unclear titles, outdated structures. I'm thinking ahead. You are thinking ahead, I agreed. Without being invited. I'm your next of kin. You are my son, I corrected. That does not grant you present authority. He sounded tired now, annoyed. This is exactly what I meant about capacity. You're overcomplicating something simple. Cancel the pickup, I said again. I won't. The word landed flat and final. We'll talk tomorrow, he added. Once you see the numbers, you'll calm down. Calm down. I ended the call without raising my voice. Then I walked back into the garage and removed the cover entirely. I ran my hand along the curve of the fender. The paint was cool beneath my palm. He had signed something. That much was clear. Whether he had understood what he was signing was another matter. At 11:47 a.m. the next day, a white flatbed truck turned onto my street, and my son stepped out of his SUV behind it, holding a folder as though he were delivering good news. At 11:47 a.m., the flatbed eased to a stop in front of my house. It wasn't loud. No dramatic engine roar, just the steady hiss of air brakes and the low mechanical idle of a man doing his job. Daniel's SUV pulled in behind it. I was already standing in the driveway. The Corvette sat exposed in the open garage, sunlight catching the curve of its hood. I had rolled it back a few feet that morning, not to surrender it, just to make it clear that I was aware of what was happening. The driver stepped down from the truck, clipboard in hand. Mid-30s, baseball cap, neutral expression. Mr. Harrington? He asked. I am Richard Harrington, I replied. Before I could say more, Daniel approached, brisk and composed. Hey, he said quietly, as if we were meeting for lunch. Let's just make this smooth. For whom? I asked. He ignored that. To the driver, he said, we've got the title signed. Funds were wired yesterday. We're good to load. The driver glanced between us. Just need final confirmation from the owner. Daniel smiled. That's handled. I looked at him. Handled, I repeated. He lowered his voice. Dad, don't make a scene. A scene on my own driveway. I'm not the one who invited strangers to remove my property, I said calmly. The driver shifted awkwardly. I can give you folks a minute. That won't be necessary, Daniel said quickly. I noticed then that Claire wasn't present. That was deliberate too. Daniel walked toward the garage, gesturing for the driver to follow. It's in great shape, he said. Full restoration. Matching numbers, he spoke with pride, as though he'd done the restoration himself. I remained where I was, as the driver began lowering the ramp. Daniel stepped closer to him, voice lowered but not low enough. Honestly, he muttered with a small chuckle. Convincing the old man was the hardest part. The driver gave a polite half-laugh. Unsure, I heard every word. There are moments in a man's life when something inside him rearranges itself. Permanently, it wasn't the sale that struck me then. It was the phrasing, the old man. Not, Dad, not my father. An obstacle, a negotiation. Walked slowly toward them. Convincing me of what, Daniel? I asked. He stiffened slightly. Dad, I just meant that I required persuasion. I finished. The driver straightened, sensing tension. Sir, I just need to verify. You'll have verification, I said, without looking away from my son. Daniel's jaw tightened. We already discussed this. The money's in the account. Which account? I asked again. He hesitated. That's not the point. It is precisely the point. The driver cleared his throat. Look, if there's any uncertainty, I can reschedule. Daniel turned sharply. There's no uncertainty. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed my phone. There is a particular kind of calm that arrives when humiliation peaks. It is not weakness. It is clarity. I stepped a few feet away and dialed a number I had not needed to use in months. Margaret and Cole, the receptionist answered. This is Richard Harrington, I said. I need Thomas Cole immediately. There was no hold music. Thomas has been my attorney for 22 years. He answered in under 30 seconds. Richard, my son has executed a bill of sale for the Corvette, I said evenly. A buyer is presently in my driveway with transport. A pause. Paper shuffling. Was the purchaser informed the asset is held under Harrington Industrial Holdings? He asked. I suspect not. Another pause. Longer this time. Richard, he said carefully, that vehicle is listed as a depreciating corporate asset on the books. Any unauthorized sale could constitute misrepresentation, possibly fraud depending on signatures. I see. Did you sign anything? I did not. Then no transfer has occurred. Not legally. Across the driveway, Daniel was speaking to the driver in a low, urgent tone. Thomas continued. Do not allow the vehicle to leave. I'm coming over. That won't be necessary, I said quietly. Instead, I'd like you to prepare documentation for a meeting tomorrow at the office. A brief silence. Understood, he replied. Ended the call and walked back toward the truck. The driver looked relieved to see me. Sir? He asked. There has been a misunderstanding, I said calmly. The vehicle is not personally owned. It cannot be transferred without corporate authorization. Daniel stared at me. Corporate, Dad, stop. The driver frowned. So, no pickup? No pickup, I confirmed. He nodded quickly and began retracting the ramp. I'll let dispatch know. Daniel stepped closer to me, voice low and sharp. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said evenly. I am placing it in proportion. It's a car. It is an asset, I corrected. One you attempted to liquidate without authority. His face flushed. I was trying to manage things. You were trying, I said quietly. To manage me. The truck pulled away. The driveway returned to silence. Daniel stood there, folder still in his hand. Confidence eroding, but not yet gone. This isn't over, he said. You're right, I replied. It isn't. And for the first time I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. The next morning, I was in my office by 8. Not the home study with its oak shelves and framed photographs, but the 32nd floor. Harrington Industrial Holdings. Frosted glass doors. Reception desk. The company name etched in steel beside the entrance. I do not come in often, but when I do, people notice. My assistant, Carol, who has been with me since 1998, stood when I stepped off the elevator. "Good morning." "Mr. Harrington," she said, warmth in her voice. Not surprise. Not concern. "Good morning, Carol." She handed me a slim folder. "Mr. Cole is waiting in Conference B." Thomas stood as I entered. Late 60s. Impeccable suit. The kind of man who reads footnotes twice. We shook hands. "I reviewed the corporate registry at 7, he said without preamble. "The Corvette is titled under Harrington Industrial Holdings. Asset Division 3. Purchased through the company in 2014 when you restructured personal holdings. I remember. It's listed as a depreciating but appreciating specialty asset, insured under the corporate policy. In other words," I said, taking a seat, "it is not mine to give away casually." "Correct," Thomas replied, "and certainly not your son's." He opened the folder. I obtained a copy of the bill of sale from the buyer this morning. He was cooperative once informed there might be a title irregularity. I scanned the document. There it was, Daniel's signature. Signed, Daniel Harrington, family representative. I felt no anger. Only a tightening in my chest. Not from betrayal, but from recognition. He had truly believed proximity was authority. "There is no power of attorney on file," Thomas continued. "None executed. None implied. I never granted one. I'm aware." He adjusted his glasses. "Richard, this is serious. Signing on behalf of a corporation without officer status or authorization could be construed as fraudulent conveyance." I nodded slowly. "And the funds?" I asked. "Deposited into a joint personal account you share with him. That creates additional complications." "Complications for whom?" "For him, primarily." Silence settled between us. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You have options. We can pursue formal action, file a notice, demand restitution, even involve authorities if necessary." I closed the folder. "No," I said. He studied me carefully. "You're certain?" "Yes. Why?" "Because this is not a criminal mind," I replied. "It is an entitled one." Thomas considered that. "Then what would you like to do?" I looked out the window. The city below moved with indifferent efficiency. Delivery trucks, pedestrians, construction cranes pivoting slowly in the distance. "When Daniel was 8, I said quietly, "he tried to give away my watch to a friend at school." Thomas blinked. "Your watch?" He thought I had many. He believed abundance meant dispensability. "And what did you do?" I explained the difference between ownership and access. Thomas allowed himself a faint smile. "And now?" "Now," I said, turning back to him. "The lesson requires a larger classroom." He understood immediately. "You want him here?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "As a guest." Thomas nodded once. "Boardroom?" "Yes. I'll prepare documentation outlining corporate ownership, officer designations, and asset control structure. Include shareholder breakdown," I added. His eyebrow lifted slightly. "You intend to clarify that as well?" "I do." He closed the folder decisively. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon." Thomas hesitated. "Richard, once this is presented formally, the illusion will not be recoverable." "I'm aware. Are you prepared for what that does to the relationship?" I took a slow breath. "My son believed he was stepping into authority," I said. "It is better he learn the boundaries now than in probate court." Thomas gave a single, respectful nod. "I'll have everything ready." As I stood to leave, Carol looked up from her desk. "Everything all right, Mr. Harrington?" she asked gently. "Yes," I replied. And for the first time since the truck pulled into my driveway, I felt something steady beneath my feet. Not anger, not revenge, structure. Daniel believed he was managing a retired man with sentimental attachments. Tomorrow, he would discover he had attempted to liquidate an asset belonging to an active holding company, one in which he held exactly 0%, and the difference between those two realities would be explained. "In writing?" Daniel arrived 12 minutes late. That was not unusual for him. He had developed the habit over the past few years, arriving late enough to suggest he was busy, but not late enough to require an apology. Carol showed him into Conference B at 2:12. I was seated at the head of the table. Thomas sat to my right. Across from him were Elaine Porter, our Chief Financial Officer, and Victor Lane, our Chief Operating Officer. Both had worked with me for more than 20 years. Daniel paused just inside the doorway. His eyes moved from me to Thomas, then to Elaine and Victor. "What is this?" he asked. "A meeting," I said. He gave a small laugh, though it didn't carry much confidence. "You called me down here over the car?" "I called you here because paperwork requires clarity." He took the empty chair halfway down the table instead of the one directly across from me. "A small decision, perhaps, but I noticed it." "You could have handled this at home," he said. "I could have," I replied. "But you chose to conduct business without me. So we will address it in the place where business is conducted." His face tightened. Thomas opened a black folder and placed several documents in front of Daniel. "For the record," Thomas said, "this meeting concerns the attempted sale of a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette. Vehicle identification number ending in 4418. Daniel didn't pick up the documents. "This is ridiculous," he said. "The buyer got his money back." "Nobody lost anything. The buyer did not receive the vehicle," Thomas said evenly. "The funds were reversed before clearing. So yes, no loss occurred. That is fortunate." Daniel looked at me. "Dad, tell them this was a misunderstanding." I held his gaze. "It was," I said. "But not the kind you mean." Thomas slid the first page closer to him. "This is the vehicle title," he said. "Please read the registered owner." Daniel finally looked down. For a few seconds, there was only the faint sound of paper moving beneath his fingers. His expression changed gradually, not dramatically. Daniel was never a man who showed uncertainty easily, but I watched his jaw set. I watched his eyes return to the top of the document, then move down again more slowly. "Harrington Industrial Holdings," he read. "Yes," Thomas said. Daniel looked up. "That's just for insurance purposes." "No," Elaine said for the first time. Her voice was calm, professional. "The vehicle was transferred into the company asset portfolio 11 years ago, during Mr. Harrington's estate and liability restructuring. It is insured, maintained, and recorded as a corporate specialty asset." Daniel stared at her. "But it's his car." "It is a vehicle he enjoys," Elaine replied. "The company owns it." He turned back to me. "You never told me that." "You never asked," I said. He scoffed quietly. "Why would I ask?" "It was in your garage. You drive it. I also sit in this office," I said. "That does not make you chairman." The room went still. Daniel looked toward Thomas, seeking a softer answer. "So what?" "I made an honest mistake." Thomas folded his hands. "You represented yourself as a family representative with authority to sell a corporate asset. You signed transaction documents on behalf of someone who had not authorized you. That is more than an error in judgment." Daniel's face flushed. "I was trying to help him," he said. Victor spoke next. His voice was low and measured. "Helping someone usually begins with asking what they need." Daniel glanced at him sharply. "I didn't come here to be lectured by Dad's employees." Victor did not react. "No," I said. "You came here because I invited you. The people at this table are not here to lecture you. They are here because they have responsibilities you chose to assume, without understanding." Daniel pushed the folder away. "This is unbelievable. You're making me sound like some kind of criminal." "I have not called you one," I said. "But you brought your lawyer." "Yes." "And your executives." "Yes." "Over a car." "No," I said quietly. "Over the way you looked at me while you tried to take it. For the first time." He had no immediate answer. I let the silence remain. Then Thomas opened a second folder. "This," he said, "is the corporate officer registry. Mr. Harrington is chairman and majority shareholder. Ms. Porter is chief financial officer. Mr. Lane is chief operating officer. You are not listed as an officer, director, shareholder, or authorized agent." Daniel looked at the pages without touching them. "I'm his son," he said finally. I know, I replied. Then why am I not included? The question came out more wounded than angry. And despite everything, I felt something in my chest soften. Not enough to excuse him, but enough to remember that fathers never stop seeing the child beneath the grown man. Because inclusion is not automatic, I said. It is earned through trust, competence, and respect. His eyes hardened again. So that's what this is. You don't trust me. I trusted you, I said. I trusted you with a key to my home. Access to an emergency account. A place in my life. You mistook access for permission. He looked down at the polished table. Thomas placed one final document before him. There is also the matter of the funds, he said. The attempted sale proceeds were directed to a joint personal account. We need a written acknowledgement that you had no authority to receive or direct funds from a corporate asset sale. Daniel's head snapped up. You want me to sign something? I want the record corrected, I said. He sat back, breathing through his nose. For a moment I thought he might stand and leave. Instead, he picked up the pen Thomas had placed beside the document, but before he put it to paper, he looked at me one more time. And what happens now? He asked. I looked toward the windows at the city spread beneath us. Now, I said, we discuss everything you assumed would be yours. Daniel did not sign immediately. He held the pen in his hand, turning it once between his fingers, as if the weight of it had changed. And what happens now? He repeated. The question was no longer defiant. It was searching. I remained seated at the head of the table. What happens now, I said calmly, is clarity. Thomas stepped back slightly, giving the moment space. Elaine and Victor remained still, present but silent. You believed, I continued, that you were stepping into management of my affairs. Daniel didn't deny it. I believed, he said carefully, that you were slowing down. I am, I replied. That does not mean I am finished. He looked at the documents again. You never told me the company still held assets like this. The company holds far more than this, Elaine said gently. Daniel glanced at her, surprised. I nodded once. The Corvette is one line item in a portfolio. Real estate, equipment, equity positions, all structured deliberately. For what? He asked. For stability, I said. For continuity. For the 312 employees whose mortgages depend on this company making prudent decisions. He swallowed. I thought you were retired. I stepped away from daily oversight, I said. I did not relinquish ownership. There is a difference. Silence, then I folded my hands. You also assumed something else, his eyes met mine. You assumed that because you are my son, succession is automatic. His jaw tightened slightly, isn't it? No, I said. Succession is a responsibility, not a birthright. The words were not harsh, just precise. I had planned, I continued, to begin involving you formally next year. Gradual exposure, governance training, financial review. But involvement requires discipline. Daniel looked genuinely startled. You were going to bring me in? Yes. Then why didn't you say anything? Because timing matters, I replied. And because I needed to be certain you understood the difference between stewardship and possession. He stared at the table. I wasn't trying to steal from you, he said. Quietly, I know. I just thought it was inevitable, that I'd be handling it soon anyway. Inevitable, I repeated. Death is inevitable. Authority is not. Thomas placed a new folder in front of me. I opened it and slid a single sheet across the table toward Daniel. This, I said, is a restructuring of access. He looked at it but didn't touch it. The emergency account you've had access to will be closed, I continued. You will no longer have signing visibility on any personal or corporate holdings. His head lifted sharply. You're cutting me off? I am establishing boundaries. That account helped us manage cash flow between projects. I am aware, I said, which is why I extended it. It was support, not entitlement. His face flushed, not with anger this time, but with something closer to realization. You think I used you. I think, I said carefully, that you became comfortable treating my resources as extensions of your own. He looked away. I will continue to assist you when I choose to, I added. But assistance will be requested, not presumed. The room was very quiet, and the company? He asked. The company, I said, will remain under its current governance structure. If in the future you wish to be considered for a role, you will apply formally. You will meet the same performance standards as any external candidate. He let out a short breath. You want me to interview for my own father's company? Yes, that's humiliating. No, I replied. It is professional. He said nothing after a long pause. He picked up the pen and signed the acknowledgement Thomas had prepared, confirming. He had no authority to sell the vehicle, and no claim to the proceeds. He set the pen down. Gently, I didn't expect this, he admitted. I know. He looked at me then, not as a manager, not as a successor, but as a son who had misjudged the weight of something. I thought you were fading, he said quietly. I held his gaze. I am aging, I replied. I am not fading. Another silence passed between us, different from the earlier ones. Less combative, more exposed. You embarrassed me, he said. I did not raise my voice, I answered. That's not what I mean. I understood. Authority. When quiet can feel colder than anger. I did not bring you here to shame you, I said. I brought you here so you would understand the structure you attempted to bypass. He nodded once, slowly. And the car? He asked. The car, I said, remains exactly where it belongs. He gave the faintest hint of a rueful smile. In your garage. In my care, I corrected. The distinction mattered. The house felt different that evening, not larger. Not emptier, clearer. I stood in the garage for a long time after returning from the office. The Corvette rested under its cover again, the fabric smooth and undisturbed. I placed my hand lightly on the hood, not out of possessiveness, but out of acknowledgement. It had never truly been about the car. It had been about assumption. Daniel did not call that night. He sent a brief message instead. I need some time to think. I replied with 3 words. Take the time. For the next 2 weeks, our contact was minimal. No Sunday dinners. No casual check-ins about market trends or my granddaughter's piano lessons. Claire sent a polite text asking if I would still attend Emma's recital. I told her I would. At the recital, Daniel avoided discussing the meeting. We sat 3 chairs apart in the school auditorium. When Emma walked on stage, he leaned forward with the same protective intensity he had shown as a young father. For a moment, I saw him not as a man grasping for control, but as someone afraid of instability. Fear often disguises itself as authority. After the performance, we stood in the parking lot beneath soft yellow lights. You didn't have to do it in front of them, he said quietly. I did, I replied. Why? Because you made a decision in the language of business. It required an answer in the same language. He considered that. I thought you didn't trust me, he admitted. I trusted you with access, I said. You interpreted that as ownership. He looked down at the pavement. I've been under pressure, he said. The last venture didn't land the way I hoped. Cash flow's tight. Claire's anxious. I kept thinking, once things transition, it'll stabilize. Transition, I repeated. He nodded. I wasn't waiting for you to die, he added quickly. I just assumed the shift had already started, and you wanted to accelerate it. Yes, there it was, not greed. Exactly, impatience, a belief that inheritance is a timetable rather than a responsibility. Daniel, I said gently, do you know why the company still holds that car? He shook his head. Because when I restructured my estate after your mother passed, I realized something. Personal assets become emotional battlegrounds. Corporate assets are governed by structure. Boards, votes, policies. He listened carefully. I moved certain items into the company not to hide them, I continued, but to protect them from sentiment, from haste, from misunderstanding, and from me, he said. Yes, I answered. The word landed between us without hostility. He didn't argue. Over the next month, something shifted in our conversations. He began asking questions instead of making suggestions. How does the board evaluate expansion risk? What qualifications would matter if someone wanted to join at an executive level? He never directly said he wanted in, but the implication was there, tempered now with humility. I did not rush to answer everything. Start with the annual reports, I told him. Read them cover to cover. Then we'll talk, he did. 3 weeks later, He came to my house alone on a Saturday morning. I finished them, he said, holding a marked-up binder. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once questioned my capacity. This time, his tone was different. I underestimated what you're still carrying, he said. I'm not carrying it alone, I replied. That's the point of structure. He nodded. And the interview? He asked after a pause. If you want it, I said, submit a resume to Carol like any other candidate. He almost smiled. You're serious? I am. He leaned back in his chair. You really would have brought me in next year? Yes, even after all this? I considered that. This, I said carefully, was not the disqualifying act. Refusing to learn from it would have been. He absorbed that quietly. As for the Corvette, I began driving it again, once every 2 weeks, sometimes with no destination in mind. The engine's sound is steady, deliberate. It does not rush. One afternoon, Daniel asked if he could join me. We drove along the river road in near silence. After a while, he said, I used to think this car proved you'd made it. It does, said, and I thought selling it meant you didn't need to prove anything anymore. I glanced at him briefly. I don't keep it to prove anything, I said. I keep it to remember what it took. He nodded slowly. There is a difference between wealth and legacy. Wealth is transferable. Legacy is instructional. I will not live forever. I am not naive about that. The company will eventually change hands. Assets will be distributed. Decisions will pass to the next generation. But authority must be grown into, not grabbed. A son can inherit property in a single afternoon. Becoming worthy of stewardship takes longer. A few days ago, Daniel sent me a draft of his resume. It was more honest than I expected. Fewer inflated titles, more acknowledgement of lessons learned. At the bottom, under a section labeled Professional Objective, he had written, to earn responsibility rather than assume it. I read that line twice, then I called him. I received your application, I said. And? We'll schedule a formal interview, I replied. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. I looked out at the garage through the kitchen window. The Corvette sat inside, still, patient. You're welcome, I told him. Just remember something. What's that? A man can give his son many things, I said. Opportunity, support, even forgiveness. I paused. But he cannot give him the right to take. And this time, my son did not argue.